Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Thok the Bloodthirsty 10-man heroic in the Siege of Orgrimmar.
Hello!
Hello, and this encounter is probably the first heroic boss that you'll come across in this instance that is actually relatively difficult, I'd say.
Yeah, you're going to actually struggle on this most likely. You do need to put quite a lot of hours into it to get it exactly right. Not a lot has actually changed on heroic, but you do have to approach the encounter quite differently than you did on normal mode.
Now, before we go into details about the fight, if you haven't seen our normal mode guide, then please do click up on the screen now. Quite a lot of the normal mode mechanics are in heroic, and it's probably a good idea that you go watch that so you know what the fuck's going on, because we're not going to go over the normal mode mechanics too hard. So yeah, go watch that, it'll save us some time. Now for this fight, you want to bring 1 tank, 3 healers, and mixed DPS makeup. Really, it doesn't matter what DPS you bring, you just want sort of a balance. Make sure that you don't bring more than 1 melee, because melee aren't really that decent here. However, the healers, it's important that you have some sort of healing diversity. If you have too many of one particular type of healer, you're probably going to struggle in phase 1, and you'll understand why a bit in the moment. So if you can bring a balance, then you really should. It's incredibly important if you have a Holy Paladin. You don't really want 2 Holy Paladins, but if you can bring 1, then that's awesome. And also if you can bring a Paladin tank, that's awesome as well, because bops will actually make it so you can't be interrupted by the screech that comes in. And the same with Aura Masteries, which will allow you to keep going and going as long as you possibly can during phase 1. But ultimately, the best AoE healers on this fight are probably going to be your druids. Shamans are very, very strong with a bot because they can just spam like heals in Ascendance. And also on the AoE healing side of things, monks are quite strong as well. Disc priests aren't bad. I think their HPS might struggle compared to the others, but being able to bring pain and barrier and just shields in general is really, really nice. So, but the point I'm trying to make here is just make sure that you have some sort of diversity. Don't stack too many of one particular healing class because it's not going to work for you.
Now the main thing you'll notice in this encounter is that the boss has 654 million health. You might not think, oh, that's kind of alright, but every time he eats a jailed NPC, he'll heal himself for 50 million health, so giving him about 800 million health or so. Like his effective health pool is about 800 million, so it is a lot of health this boss has, because you will need to open every single jail, so that will heal him for about 150 million throughout the encounter, because in phase 2 he gets really fast, so you can't really stay in there for a huge amount of time, so you will be using every single one of those jails.
And that's really the most difficult thing about this encounter. Just because the boss has so much health, you are forced to stay in phase 1 as long as you possibly can. Now to start off, we're going to talk about phase 1 and what you need to do just to make sure that you keep going in this phase as long as you possibly can. Now on heroic, the deafening screech that comes in every time the boss has full energy deals far more damage than it did on normal, and it will drop you below that 50% threshold, which means every time it does go off, if you don't pop some sort of damage reduction, which you're not going to be able to do for every single one anyway, you will get the Bloodified debuff. And obviously, if too many people have the Bloodified debuff, well, 5 people, if they're stood too close, it will then transition you into phase 2.
Because you don't have all the damage reductions in the world, to keep you going through phase 1 long enough, you are forced to split your raid into groups that are stacked more than 5 yards apart to prevent the phase from ending. So you have like 4 people in one group and 4 people in the other group, and that'll make it so even though you might all be able to fit in one healing rain, you're 5 yards apart, so when he does do his deafening screech, like everyone will become bloodied, but you won't transition.
So just to expand on that a little bit, what we do in phase 1 is that we have sort of like a triangle shape inside the circle of the healing rain and the efflorescence, where one group has 4 people, another group has 4 people, and then we have like a right on the tip of the triangle on the other side there is a rogue. We just have the melee standard at that point as well. So if you did have 2 melee, you can do that as well. Just make sure that they are in range of the boss. Just position that the melee obviously don't get stunned by the tail, because if you get hit by the tail and the screech, you probably could get 1 hit. And then the tank obviously is nowhere near anyone, so it doesn't matter.
Now for this first phase 1, you want to go as close to 30 stacks of deafening screech as possible. If you do hit the 30 stack mark, however, you'll face a pseudo enrage mechanic that will more or less make the screech hit you for about 1 million damage. They kind of added this in because people were just going indefinitely in phase 1, and they was like, nah, you're not doing that anymore. So once you do hit 30 stacks, you are going to pretty much wipe, so make sure you do never hit that 30 stacks mark, and you just all group up to make it so you go into the transition, even if that's at 29 stacks.
Now, like normal, each screech you do will make his next screech come in quicker. However, this does actually cap out around like the 8 or 9 screech mark. I can't remember exactly when it was. You'll notice it because it'll start to fucking hurt, which means you're forced to have some sort of healing cooldown rotation or damage reduction rotation. Otherwise, you're never ever going to make it to the 27 or 28 or 29 mark. Now, obviously, each raid composition that you guys are going to bring to this boss is going to be different from another. So it's extremely difficult for us personally to say, you need to bring this class and do this cooldown at this moment. So really this is something that you have to work out yourself, but there are a few things that you need to keep in mind when you are making this list, and obviously the most important one is Paladins. Blessing of Protection will make players immune from the interrupt from this boss, as the Screech is actually a physical effect, which means the interrupt is also a physical effect. So you can use bops on people like Druids so they can trank without getting interrupted. You can also put them on Shamans so they can hard cast with Ascendance, which is like pretty big healing cooldown. And also Aura Mastery will do the exact same thing, except you will still take the physical damage, but you just won't be interrupted. So that's something to also keep in mind. Aura Mastery lasts in 6 seconds.
Yeah, so that's really nice if you can bring a Paladin tank and a Paladin healer, those two together, with all of their devotion auras and everything like that. It's going to be really, really nice for you guys to be able to constantly keep healing without being interrupted all the time. Now, to give you an idea of what your cooldown rotation list might look like, here was ours. So we use Aura Mastery on the 6th hit, we use the Paladin healer cooldowns and Bubble on the 8th hit, Aura Mastery on the 10th hit, Druid Tank and Bop, so of course we don't get interrupted, at the 12th hit. We use the Shaman Healer cooldowns and Bop on the 15th, because he's bopped he doesn't get interrupted. Now we use the Smoke Bomb on the 18th stack. Now this is somewhat dangerous to pull off, because your rogue needs to move back, place a bomb in between both groups, and if a Screech is going off at that exact same time, everyone's going to be reduced below 50% and you will phase it, and that's just awful. So you've got to make sure you do it between each Screech, and that's a very narrow time window, so make sure your rogue can pull that off properly if you use the Smoke Bomb. Then we use a Boomkin Trank and Bop for the 19th stack, and the Shaman Healer's Healing Tide for the 22nd stack. And we kind of break the phase at 27 or 28 mark, just by stacking up all together, so we can get out before the 30 stack mark.
Yeah, when the Shaman does use the Healing Tide tome, that's when people start using personals. You don't really want to use Health Stones ever unless you're going to die in phase 1. Like, if the Screech is like 0.1 second away from going off and you're on 10% health, then yeah, using a Health Stone is probably a good idea, but really you want to save them for phase 2. And obviously DPS during phase 1, you really should just be focusing on perfecting your like cast times between each boss Screech, so you never get silenced, and you really just want to work out how to maximize your DPS. One thing you might want to do, especially if you're a dot class, is reapply your dots as he's casting the Screech, so you're not just standing there like a lemon waiting for him to finish the cast. At least you're like reapplying your dots or doing something at least. Now, once you have broke it at this 27-28 mark, you then will move into phase 2. Now, the Fixate in phase 2, well, the boss's movement speed anyway, is a lot quicker than it was on normal. To start off, it's not. I mean, obviously, he's still really fucking slow to start with, but around like the 5th Fixate, which is when you end it anyway, he's moving incredibly quickly. He's moving almost double the speed of what he was on normal mode. However, there's actually a way of predicting Fixates. The Fixates can be very predictable just by the way of where you're standing in the room. Now, when the boss does cast Fixate, he'll always prefer to pick certain targets over others, and it is the exact same in normal mode. We didn't actually mention this in our normal mode guide because we wasn't too sure of it ourselves until we actually progressed on this fight and worked it out. And because it is predictable, you can actually avoid getting double or triple Fixates, because if this happens on Heroic, you can guarantee it's almost a wipe, because not only does it fuck up the boss's positioning, but it will also mean that that person's going to die. Now, the boss will always target a player that isn't within like 20 or 30 yards of himself, and that sort of yardage is a bit vague.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the exact amount it is, because it doesn't say it in any spell IDs, and it doesn't say it on the dungeon journal or anything like that. But it is roughly 20 to 30 yards, unless everyone is stood that close. If everyone is stood within 20 or 30 yards of him, then he'll pick one of those people. If 9 people are stood that close, then he'll pick the person that isn't stood that close. However, if a target is more than about 150 yards away from him, he will not target them either. So there's sort of like a middle ground between like the 30 to 150 yard mark, anywhere between that area where he will target those sort of players. And if everyone is stood inside that area, the player that is stood furthest away is most likely to be the target that's also picked. So to make this extremely clear, here's a bird's eye view of the room, here's the boss. These red dots are raid members, and we've just entered phase 2. This target has been fixated first, which is pretty much random every single time because everyone would have just been stacked up next to the boss. And you want this first guy to kite him down towards the entrance of the room. And when the fixate cast is almost finished, that player then wants to make sure that he's like as close to the boss as possible without it being dangerous and without him being like eaten again. And because he has stood so close to the boss after the fixate, that puts him in the 20 to 30 yard range bracket thing that allows him to not be targeted again, providing everyone else in the raid is further than 30 yards away from the boss, which everyone would be at this point. However, if this red dot guy here was stood over here, he would not be fixated either because he stood so far away from the boss. I mean, that's obviously not that important because you don't really want anyone stood over there anyway because it's like fucking miles away. He won't be able to heal or do any damage to the boss. But it's just an example, just so you get an idea of how it works. Now, the next guy that receives the fixate would move in the opposite direction, and you just kite the boss up and down, up and down, up and down. Now, the most important thing that you need to know is that after you have kited the fixate, that you stand near the boss once it has finished to prevent it from being recast on you again, but don't stand too close or you will die. That's the only important thing, really. One thing to also note is that the random AoE damage that's going on in this phase hurts a lot more. So really that's when you want to save health stones. If you are the person who is kiting the boss away and you have no self-healing mechanics or you have no personal cooldown up and you're on 10% health, you are going to die because it's a very bad idea for the healers to run up and down with you to heal you. So this is where you want to use your health stones. And just a note for the healers, when someone does get targeted for a fixate, it's a really good idea just to throw hots on them, because then if they do get targeted by the random AoE damage, they'll be healed straight back up. And like we said at the start, you want to kite him for 5 fixates, which is around 14 movement stacks. And the very last kite, the very last fixate, he does move extremely quickly, so if you can have like a warlock portal in place, that can help that person, or if not, druids can use roar or anything just to help that person get as far away as they possibly can. Another thing you can do, which we wouldn't really recommend too much, is have speed potions on you, just in case, because there might be that moment where you're like, fuck, I haven't got any movement speed increase. Oh wait, I have a speed potion in my bags, like, let's use that. You can do that if you want, but you shouldn't really need to.
Now the jailer in this fight, he hasn't really changed that much, except he will hit very hard if you're one tanking. So do save an external cooldown for the tank if this is the case, and really the melee should just kill the jailer. Now open the first jail, we choose the bottom left, which is the poison debuff jail, during the last fixate cast. Now do note that when the boss is running over to the jailer to eat him, he is no longer in his fixate mode, so that means you can't be trampled by him or you can't get eaten by him, so feel free just not to, oh crap, he's on his way, you can run all over him if you want to. Now you can use the same markers for positioning from the first phase 1 for your next phase 1 as well.
Now in this next phase 1 we only go for 5 stacks, and this is really because all of our healing cooldowns are still on cooldown from the previous phase 1, and you also have to deal with a new mechanic that's been added in Heroic, well it's a new mob, which is the captured cave bats. Now how these work is that around the 3rd stack of the Screech, a large wave of bats will spawn that deal like ridiculous AoE damage on the raid. And that added with the Screech from the boss can also like get in the regions of like one hitting you, or you'll just be so low that your healers can't really keep up, which means you are forced to change the phase. Now these bats are really awkward to pick up if you are solo tanking, so hunters make sure you MD and rogues make sure you tricks, just so the tank picks them up as soon as you possibly can. Now if you do have Elemental Shaman, Boomkins or Shadow Priests, this is like the perfect time for them to use Guidance or Vigil or Vampiric Embrace, just to make sure that your raid is like permanently topped. There's like 8 bats or something like that, and if you have an Elemental Shaman with Guidance up, the whole raid is getting healed for like retarded amounts. It's like 400, 500 or even 600k HPS just getting blown up on the raid's face. So make sure you do that, because the bats are just a complete pain. And really you should be looking at killing the bats like almost before the boss even starts fixating players, which will be after the 5th stack once you're in phase 2.
Now this next phase 2 is exactly the same as the previous, except now you have the debuff to dispel. Master Spell is really good, but if you do not have this at hand, you'll just need to have to dispel it on cooldown and heal it up as much as you possibly can.
One thing to note is that the debuff can be placed on people who are kiting, which makes the situation even worse for people who can get randomly damaged by the boss's AoE abilities. So really, there's not really much you can do about this. People just need to, again, use health stones and try and use their personal cooldowns when they're being fixated, just to minimize the amount of RNG factor that could fucking kill these people.
After 5 fixates, open up the frozen jail and stack on your pre-made markers and tank him similarly to you tanked him in the second phase 1. It's pretty much the same. Now at this point, most if not all of your healing cooldowns will be up, and it is likely that your bops will be still on cooldown however, so all will just be coming off cooldown very soon, so keep this in mind when making your next healing rotation cooldown list.
Now our healing rotation for this particular phase 1 is that we use AM on 4, the Paladin uses all his cooldowns and his bubble on 5, we then have another AM on 7, we then have a Resto Trank with Bop around the 10 mark, and then the Shaman just blows everything he has around the 15, 14 mark, something like that. and around the 18 mark, that's when we stack up. Now, really, you could keep going in this phase 1 as long as you went like 4 in the previous phase 1, but it isn't really needed if your DPS is on target, and dealing with like the ice tombs from the frozen stack can be really fucking scary sometimes. The frozen tombs have like a mil health, but yeah, it's just not optimal.
Now, during this phase 1, you actually have the last addition to heroic mode, which is the Starved Yeti. Now, similarly, you got the bats beforehand. The bats aren't there anymore. Now you have a fucking Yeti you have to deal with. Now, this Yeti works the exact way that the Yeti works on the trash. He'll target random areas of the room and charge towards it. Anyone hit whilst he is charging will be 1 hit if they do not use a personal cooldown. So he fucking hurts. He's a very, very aggressive Yeti.
I mean, it's all physical damage, so like plate wearers might be able to survive it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't risk it,
No.
to be honest. But yeah, you really shouldn't get hit by him anyway. Now, we don't actually decide to kill the Yeti. You could if you want, but he does have a lot of health. He has around 20 mil health, so it wouldn't take too long to kill him, but really you want as much damage going on the boss as possible. Now, if you are struggling with this Yeti, then you can kill him, but like we say, it's not really optimal. We just leave him up the entire time and just cool when he's like coming close to the raid. And if he is going through the raid, simply just spread apart, which means that you're not really going to get the passive AoE healing from the healing rains and the effervescence, but it's better not having that healing than dying to the Yeti. This is another point where you might want to use a health stone while you are moving. But really, this situation like happened like very few times. I think we had it maybe twice or 3 times where the Yeti did actually come through the raid while we were stacked up. I mean, it's just pure RNG. The Yeti just goes wherever the fuck he wants, so just don't get hit by him, and yeah, just go for the 18 mark and then stack up, get ready for your phase 2. This phase 2 is exactly the same, except your people are getting the frost debuff. It's very unlikely anyone will get tombed. You'd have to get RNG ridiculously hard to get tombed, but if you are tombed while you're kiting the fixate, it's pretty much a wipe. That guy's gonna die. There's just nothing you can do about that. That never happened to us though, but it is entirely possible. And then once you are finished with this phase 2, after the 5 stacks, you want to move up towards the top right jail, which is the fire jail, and that'll bring you into the next phase 1.
Now, in this phase 1, we try and keep clear of one area that we use to stack. Usually it's marked by a shroom, or you can use a raid mark or anything like that. But basically what we do, we just heal through as many stacks as we can while spread. Now, we do not recommend going really above 4 or 5 here, as the healing is really difficult without people stacked, and of course there's a bunch of fire everywhere. So what you do, you just stack up once you do get to about the 4 or 5 stage, and then you go into the last phase 2, and then pretty much you gotta get the boss down very quickly here.
In this last kite phase, people really should remain spread, like for fires, because the fires are everywhere, but you can't be too spread, because obviously the random damage that comes firing off the boss will hurt like a lot, and like the fire does almost tick immediately when it spawns sometimes, which is a bit nasty. So people just need to make sure that they are standing near healers, and really just spam all your personal cooldowns. The boss at this point in the fight really should look at being like almost dead. You really should be going into this last kite phase with the boss around 10% or even lower if you possibly can. But yeah, this is just the last bit where everyone needs to use everything they fucking got just to live. And that's more or less it. The whole encounter is just being able to have a healing rotation for phase 1, and then in phase 2 just making sure that you don't get the double fixates, because a double fixate will fuck you. And that's essentially the fight. It's very, very simple, but it is challenging nonetheless.
So thank you guys for watching. If this guide did help you out, then please do give us a like. It helps us out a lot. And make sure to comment, rate and subscribe.
And if you'd like to see other 10-man heroic guides by FatBoss, please do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and that'll take you straight to those videos.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Oh, thank you.